to follow up, expand on a couple of things you mentioned, the Harvey Milk School and the Alabama school, and that you are the leader of this national alliance of either existing schools. I think you said there are 5, and with 4 more, including your own, potentially in the works. Would you elaborate on where and what those schools are? And then the other question I had for you and for Billy is, while respecting the individual choices of each child, as Billy was particularly emphasizing, for those in the audience today and others who might view this, do you have suggestions about kind of developmentally appropriate ways of approaching conversations with, say, a 12 or 13-year-old versus a 16 or 17-year-old on this? So I'll stop and see what you have to say.
Well, to answer your first question, the schools around the nation, other than the Harvey Milk that went in 1985, and there's the Albert Einstein Academy. And the woman who started that has a lesbian daughter who wanted to go into teaching. And so she wanted to create a safe space in case any educators wanted to teach at the school. And so it's a charter school. So she has a mix of LGBTQ and non. And we have the Alliance in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Magic City Acceptance Academy in Alabama. And that just started in 2021 by Michael Wilson, the founding principal, who is gay and a baby boomer. And he said his parting gift to the community is he will be the founding principal of that school. They doubled their enrollment within the first year. And 60% of the students who go to that school are not identifying as LGBTQ, which is interesting because they say, and they were on TV, I think it was 2020, they were interviewed. And in interviewing the youth, they said, if a Black transgender student could go to this school and feel safe and affirmed, I know I could feel safe and affirmed. So it tends to be a draw for students who are being bullied and harassed. And this school has a lot of Hispanic kids who have broken English, and they're made fun of in their schools because of the language barrier. And so they just feel safe in this school. And it's a beautiful, beautiful concept. And then 5 other schools are starting. So I started with this small group of 4 of us. And little by little, people kept reaching out because we were so visible in the news. People would find Proud Academy first. And I would say, hey, join our national alliance. So now 5 more schools should be opening in September of 25, one of them in Massachusetts, and another one in Wisconsin, and another one in New York and Brooklyn called MMM, Miss Major Middle, who was a Black transgender person in the Stonewall era of 1965. So that school will be opening hopefully in September 25 as well. One in California. And we just think that this will be a ripple effect because we know that this is a movement, and to open schools, especially in states where students don't feel valued and respected, I think would be even better.
And I'll add that in terms of the kind of age appropriate, I would say that you always want to, the student should use their own language. The young person should use their own language. So, I think we have to be mindful, if you're, little things like, if there's a young girl, is there a boy you like? It's like little, do you have a boyfriend? Like all these things that we're so kind of programmed, right? Like we occupy a very heteronormative world. So innocent things that you're trying to show curiosity and sort of, and you say something like, oh, I made assumption, right? Just, and so being mindful of how you ask questions, and then let the young person use the language they use. So it's not, you're saying, oh, so does that mean you are, but no, this is about them sort of sharing with you and creating that relationship. And then you can ask, using their language, you can ask them questions. And if they want to elaborate, I think that's especially for the young, sort of say the 12-year-old, someone, say, 16, a little maybe older, has more of may very likely have a more defined sense of self, or be using certain terms to sort of represent sort of who they are, and then you can use those back, right? But I would always trust the young person. They're going to tell you, their name, who they are, what's going on in their life, and then be responsive to that, but let them sort of lead you. And that is I think a very respectful way to approach all of this.
And if I may expand on that, so age appropriate, let's say for kindergarten, because I used to teach kindergarten through 12th grade. And when talking about this, of course, it's talking about how families come in different, some are single, some are interracial, some have two moms, some might have two dads, some, so starting very generic, because it values and respects a student's family. And 5-year-olds just love everybody. They don't have any barriers, so to introduce something like this in a non-judgmental, natural way values everybody's family dynamic. And then, the same thing with families in 2nd and 3rd grade, but it's okay to say, sometimes people like to, girls like to wear boys' clothes, and sometimes boys like to wear girls' clothes, and it's fun. Kind of like when we dress up for Halloween, we feel like we're somebody else and it feels so good, so even getting them to think about, what clothes do you feel good when you wear? And if a boy says, I feel great when I wear a dress, it's okay to say, I'm glad you could share that. Good. I'm glad that makes you feel good. Somebody else, and keep it very generic. Of course, parents might freak out, with, you validating that somebody is allowed to wear a dress if they're a boy. So I think it is good to have conversations ahead of time with parents so they know the topic. So if a child goes home and says, Mommy or Daddy, guess what we talked about in school today? It's better to be proactive than reactive. And I also think it's good to have workshops for parents. These are a few topics that we might be talking about in health class or, during Pride Month, and we'd like to share the conversation with you.
One more thing I want to add, that, I think often we want to give compliments to young people as a way to break the ice. And so, as an example, if there's maybe a young man who has his nails painted, and you may want to say, oh, I like your nails. That may come off as too much, right? Like, you've brought attention, there's a self-consciousness. It might have the opposite effect. So again, right, if the student brings the tension and say, oh, don't you like my nails? Then it sort of opens the door. But again, just being very innocently, you might be trying to make a connection, and it just does something that it makes someone feel like scrutinized, because it might be triggering an experience that they've had in other contexts. So just being like, follow their lead, and they will open the doors that they want you to walk through.
Personally, in my own family, one last Christmas Eve, I had a relative, 18 years old, show up as a different gender. And, of course, I created the Safe and Affirming Christmas Eve, for this 18-year-old. But we have to respect the fact that family members are very uncomfortable with this. A grandfather who's trying his best to embrace his new granddaughter when, you had a grandson, is a leap for a lot of people. And I think it's okay to say, not in front of the child, because they're probably already feeling horrible that the impact that they're having on the family. But parents need support groups too. They need to go to groups where there are other transgender, non-binary, and it's okay to have a little bit of uneasiness around that. You want to value and respect and embrace your child unconditionally, but how do I support my own child the best I can?
Thank you both. Any questions from anyone else?
I do have a question. So, Patty, the Pride Academy, can you describe what age range or grade range is involved there? If you already did that, my apologies. But
No, I
I
didn't.
recall hearing that. And the other thing is, along with that, can you at the same time describe to what extent the curriculum would in any way differ from a quote unquote typical magnet school curriculum?
Good questions. Well, the grade level, because we'll likely land in Ansonia and they have a K-5 system, the natural leap is we start with sixth grade because fifth graders will have to make a decision. Do I go to the middle school or do I go to Proud Academy? So we are going to start with sixth grade and end with 12th grade over a 5-year period. So starting with sixth, seventh, and eighth grade for year one, keeping it small, about 65 students, and then adding, hopefully doubling that every year. And keeping it small up to like 220, 250 students. My dream is not a big school like that. That just recreates what a lot of students may have been leaving. And the curriculum, we have to put it in the charter because we purchased LGBTQ history unerased. So students will learn, and this is a K-12 curriculum, and it highlights LGBTQ people who are key people throughout history. And we also purchased self-evident education, which is the real African-American history. So, we're doing things a little different there. And we'll probably have mixed age groups. So sixth, seventh, and eighth graders might all be together. And then you differentiate the instruction. So the sixth grader gets a different lesson than the eighth grader, but they could all learn from each other as well. No longer is there sage on the stage. And I think typically a lot of public schools have the teacher in the front of the classroom with rows. You could tell a lot by going into a school what the vibe is. And if there's a teacher desk in the front and then rows, that they're a more traditional approach. So we would have small group instruction and tables, collaborative working, restorative practice for like discipline instead of help students understand their behavior. A lot of students have adverse childhood experiences, so they bring to the table a lot of trauma. So sometimes there's disruptive behavior as a result. And to put a student in in-school suspension does nothing to help them understand their behavior. So a lot of schools, even public schools, are going with Zen rooms or, reflection rooms. So that would be personed by like a counselor sitting in that room. And the student is now sitting there either just relaxing or they get to process their behavior with an adult. Non-punitive methods are the way to go. Unless it's egregious behavior, somebody brings a gun to school, then of course we have to take harsher measures. Reflection room isn't a time for a gun, bringing a gun to school. But those are some of the things. And actually, as we're speaking, we just had a curriculum meeting today because we were brainstorming all the different options that we have. When you have a tabula rasa and you're starting from scratch, you get to create what you think works. So my 30 years in education, I know what works and what doesn't work. And a teacher talking like for 45 minutes is like, oh, and then they go to the next class and the teacher talks for 45 minutes. And it's like, no.
So Patty, if I may, real quickly, I don't want to monopolize the time. So in addition to what I'm gonna call formal classroom instruction, even though some of it is informal, as you just described, do you intend to provide any kind of support group mechanisms or mentoring or any kind of one-on-one or even group assistance in terms of issues beyond the curriculum?
Oh, definitely the SEL component, the social emotional learning is interwoven into the community. Setting expectations for students. There's something called the responsive classroom, which is great. And I love this. I observed a school in Norwich, Connecticut. Here's what they do. They don't have any bells. And this is a K-8 school. They don't have bells. They just assume when the teacher says, okay, you can go to your next class, the expectation is you will get to your class on time, that we don't have to monitor that with a bell. And if you have to use the restroom, we're not going to give you a hall pass because we're going to expect that you will get to the restroom and get back to your class in time. So it's setting a whole different standard of, we expect you to make good choices out of the gate. And then if you don't, then we work our way backwards, but they start off trusting everybody. I love that concept. I think students rise to the standard that you set.
Thank you, Patty and Dwayne. Billie, I know you need to leave, so I wanted to express our appreciation, and I trust, knowing you, that you'd be happy to answer any subsequent questions that may emerge. Yes?
100%. And Josiah, you know how to reach me. So if anyone has questions or wants to talk about anything that I said, or thinks about this conversation and wants to continue to talk, happy to do so.
Billie, it was nice meeting you. Nice meeting you, Billie.
Thank you very much for your time.
So, Patty, I actually may ask you to speak a bit about the young people in the child welfare system, foster youth or others. You mentioned you'd been a foster parent yourself at some point. So could you discuss the intersection between your plans for the school, the population you're looking to serve, providing kind of a sanctuary from bullying, and foster youth, or, it could also be young people under what here in Connecticut we call protective supervision, where they remain with their families, but the Department of Children and Families and the court are involved. So what would you say to that?
Yes. Well, having worked with, I was also a director of youth mentoring, like I had mentioned, working with youth in foster care and involved with juvenile justice. So my job was to find them mentors. And since a lot of youth were identifying as LGBTQ, I knew that I needed to find them mentors that represented, their path and their journey. So it's really critical with the mentoring programs, and basically that's what your program does. You take on a youth and you provide them with opportunities, you guide them educationally. You are the lifeline for many of these youth. So I applaud you for what you do. Yeah, I did become a foster parent for 3 years, and I thought, I got this. I was a principal of an alternative school for 5 years, where kids would come in with guns and knives and death threats to the staff, and Manson Youth Institute, and Third Attempt at freshman year of high school, the heavy hitters. But I love those kids. I feel somebody has to believe in them. And I had actually one of the head of the Latin Kings, in my school, and he would say, "Miss, I got a B in geometry, and don't tell anybody I got a B in geometry, because it's not cool to be smart on the streets." You know what I mean? So, one-on-one, these kids are great. It's when they get with their peers that they have this gang mentality and become different people. So if we could one-on-one make a difference and have positive peer pressure, you get the one kid in the gang who says, "Are you kidding me? You guys are going to beat up that 95-year-old guy? Let's somebody have a little sense here." So teaching the people that you work with to be the positive peer pressure person.
What are called upstanders instead of just bystanders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The upstanders. Yeah, there's a whole program that I think schools should adopt called Safe Ambassadors Program. And it's really empowering. Middletown does this well. And I'm surprised that the entire state hasn't adopted this philosophy, because it's an anti-bullying harassment program. So you get a small group of students who volunteer to be ambassadors. And their job is, when they're out in the hallways and everything, teachers don't see everything. They're not in the bathrooms with the students. So it's the students who see the harassment and the bullying. So training these students over a 3-day training period to know how to handle bullying and stop it on the spot in a positive way. And more of that, because when schools start that, more and more students want to be involved. Your goal is every student wants to be a part of a school ambassador program.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions or comments?
Yeah, I just had a quick question, Patty. Yeah, mental health, as you know, is a big issue throughout the state, especially for young people. So, given and your population, talk about parents and everything, do you have resources in that area that's different than a traditional public school, um, in terms of like for mental health challenges that they may be facing, which may be more accentuated?
Well, Connecticut is great for mental health support. I feel like well, it depends where you are.
Yeah, I was going to say, it depends where you are.
Haddam-Killingworth may not be. We had a board member who was from Haddam-Killingworth, and we call it the cow tipping countries.
Yeah.
But in New Haven, you have the Yale Gender Affirming Center. You have so many counseling groups. Even in Derby, Connecticut, they have Twin Peaks Counseling, which is a transgender, non-binary, LGBTQ focused support group. So Connecticut has great opportunities. There's a youth group called Q Plus who works with the youth in schools and offers support groups where they meet periodically in small groups and large groups, and they do events together. Parents also meet in groups and talk about their challenges. So yes.
But as you populated your professionals working with you, do you tend to have more on your staff than a typical? Would you have more than in a typical middle school?
We probably would. We probably would have an additional staff member, depending on the profile of the student who's coming to us. But we already know that probably the first year, if they're coming to us, it's because their school isn't maybe getting their needs met.
Right.
That seems to be the families, the 60 families that reached out to us last year. That seemed to be the profile. We'd like to expand to be like Magic City Acceptance Academy, where because it's such a safe school for all students, that the door is open for everybody.
Right.
But year one will be that. Yes, we have.
Right. Yeah, it's a great mission.
Thank you.
So, final call for questions. Well, hearing none, Patty, I want to thank you and just mention a few examples of resources. There are numerous resources out there. You mentioned, for example, the alliance that you head of schools, and you mentioned PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. There's also some great resources from the Trevor Project, for example, and Children's Rights has a fact sheet. So I would encourage anyone viewing this video to explore further and also to reach out to us if they would like to ask you or Billy for your suggestions of additional resources.
And if I may add another great one, GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. They've been around for 30 years, and Kevin Jennings started that, and he ended up at the Obama administration in the education department. So they have a lot of statistics on that website, GLSEN. Great resource.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, we'll say good night, everyone. Happy Pride Month. And we thank you and Billy, Patty, for your leading this discussion.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks a lot, Patty.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.